Hello and welcome back to the Case Learning Classroom. I'm Bill Kerr, an entrepreneurial management professor at Harvard Business School. In the last lesson, we discussed how to use performance management systems and tools to boost a company's performance. No matter how good a company's founding idea or how advanced its management tools, there's no guarantee that all of its goals will be met or that all projects will be successful. Objectively speaking, success is an event with a small probability. Failure is actually more common. Of course, failure is not necessarily a bad thing, especially in this era of innovation. If handled well, failure can lead to valuable lessons and revolutionary new products. In some companies that focus on innovation, failure is even viewed as a good thing, such as the Finnish mobile gaming company Supercell, which we talked about in Lesson 2. Their teams even celebrated failed projects with champagne, because they wanted the teams to pursue daring ideas. Their high tolerance for failure has resulted in remarkable business returns. Within 6 years of its establishment, the company has launched hot games that swept the markets around the world. The company had only 200 employees, but was valued at over $10 billion US. But when failure actually comes knocking at the door, companies face a series of specific questions, such as what kind of failure should be tolerated and what kind shouldn't? What is the threshold for tolerance of failure? And, most importantly, how exactly do you learn from failure and thus build towards success? In this lesson, let's try to answer these questions. To be tolerant of failure doesn't mean to tolerate all failures. In order to understand if a failure is acceptable, we need to identify the reasons behind it. I commonly put failures into 3 types. The first type of failure is what I would call a failure that shouldn't have ever happened. For example, an e-commerce platform is launching a new set of products, but it labels them with the wrong prices and descriptions. As a result, it receives a lot of customer complaints and its brand credibility takes a hit. Or at Alvogen, the company stocks out of inventory and can't serve customers. That is never tolerated. In this lesson, we won't spend much time talking about failures like these, which typically come from either a lack of responsibility in the employees or lacks organizational management. This kind of failure isn't the point of this lesson. The second type of failure is what I would call failure that can be turned into learning. This is the kind of failure that you don't want to have happen, but you can learn from it with proper analysis and study. Robert Westman of Alvogen has said, "When you're moving fast, people will make mistakes. It's inevitable. The only thing I ask is that the same person doesn't make the same mistake twice." Let's take an extreme example, an airplane accident. Nobody wants to see that happen. But every flight accident is an opportunity for the entire aviation industry to reflect, learn, and improve. In the event of an accident, investigators independent of the airline, the pilots union, and government regulators will have full access to the accident site, retrieve the information in the black box, and conduct an inventory of all the physical evidence to produce a detailed investigation report. Airlines are required to make the reports public, and all airlines and pilots around the world have free access to them. By exploiting failures that can enable learning, aviation has become one of the safest industries in the world. The third type of failure is what I call experimental failure. It's quite different in that leaders actually want to encourage it as a way to unlock new ideas. We all know that innovative organizations run a lot of experiments, and that when you experiment, there will be uncertainty. For example, clinical trials of new drugs and SpaceX's launch of new rocket designs all have a chance of failure. But you have to take on the risk of failure if you want to innovate. These failures are different from the undesired failures that can nevertheless be turned into learning because the experiments were designed to be about learning all along. Supercell, the mobile gaming company I mentioned at the beginning, usually develops 10 or more new games at the same time. They spend months and years testing them, accepting round after round of failures before the big hit game comes along. Similarly, Hollywood invests dozens of big movies every year and tests out even more concepts behind the scenes, but only a few of them turn out to be real blockbusters. Although the cost of this trial and error is quite high, where would the big hits come from without the relative flops? That is why failure is a necessary price to pay in the pursuit of innovation. On some level, it's worth encouraging this kind of failure. Another way to say this would be, if you're doing something that has zero risk and a 100% chance of success, then it's impossible for you to create anything really novel. And in the era of innovation, that isn't a good sign. Well, the next question is then quite straightforward. Suppose you're the CEO of a company. How would you know your company's level of failure tolerance? How high should the threshold be? To be honest, it's hard to provide a precise metric. But I'm going to make an attempt by putting three types of organizations, represented by Alvogen, Supercell, and Harvard Business School, into a kind of failure tolerance spectrum in order to give you a system of reference. On one end of the spectrum are companies with a very high tolerance for failure, such as Supercell, which, as I said, tests about 20 new games for each big hit game. This means that it has a success rate of about 5% and a failure rate of 95%. To make this work, its one big hit has to be really big, have amazing new features, and be launched in a way that stands out from the competitors in the market. That's the only way the game can earn the company at least 20 times what it spent developing the game, which is essential since 19 other tested games didn't make the cut, and earn enough profits to support the next round of game development. That's also the reason why Supercell really encourages exploration and the failure that can happen when being daring. In fact, if the company hasn't had a failed project in a while, the team goes on high alert. As the CEO once said, whenever we haven't failed in a while, it's a sign that we haven't taken enough risks. On the other end of the spectrum is an education institute like Harvard Business School. Innovation in many business schools lies in the exploration of new types of education programs and offerings. We don't seek a 20x return from those programs that work, and so we also need to have a higher success rate than Supercell. If we're seeking to double our investment when a program is successful, we need at least 50% of these innovative projects to work to ensure that our overall portfolio of efforts makes a return. In other words, our school's threshold for these types of projects can be much lower rate than Supercell's 95%. Let's go back to Alvogen and think about innovation in its industry. Companies in the generics pharmaceutical industry lie somewhere in the middle of the spectrum between business schools and supercells. There's more uncertainty in this domain to bring products to market, ranging from R&D challenges to legal battles to manufacturing considerations. An aggressive company may only have a 20% success rate, which is just fine if those that work generate at least five-fold return on investment. This industry setting means that Alvogen doesn't need to pursue revolutionary products, but it does need to pursue opportunities that generate handsome returns. Alvogen wants to build a pipeline of projects that overall generate steady and growing profits, ensure that its production capacity is large enough and its quality control strict enough, and that the products can be sold in bulk all over the world with recurring customers. So if we look at our spectrum here, we can roughly arrive at the following as a reference. If your company has a high reliance on innovation and must pursue hit products, then you may need to tolerate a really high failure rate, with Supercells an extreme at 95%. But if your company's more like a business school, which needs to develop new offerings without being overly innovative, you could target a success rate closer to 50%. This, in fact, is where many mature organizations set the needle. In between are examples like Alvogen, which rely on steady and sound operations and well-controlled cost management, but also must make bigger and bigger product-to-market bets. Although your company may look different from these examples, I hope the framework will help you understand how tolerance for failure is closely connected to your company's business model. It's only when we understand this internal logic that we can move on to the next question, which is how do we learn from failure? You might be surprised by Supercell's 95% failure rate. But the point is that a high tolerance for failure doesn't bring a company like Supercell down. In fact, it's what makes it commercially successful. Supercell was the first startup in Europe to be valued at more than $10 billion. One of Supercell's tricks is that it's very good at turning failure into learning opportunities. Let's take a look at how Supercell does it. A few years ago, Supercell tested a game called Smashland, which was canceled before it was publicly launched. The team had spent nearly a year on it, but nobody got stuck wallowing in anger or frustration. Instead, the team held a detailed post-mortem on the experience. What went wrong, what went right, and what should they keep or discard, trying to find the lessons to apply to their other games. These meetings were recorded and posted on Supercell's internal wiki for further discussion. Sometime later, another team took 2 lessons from the Smashland and used them in their next game, Clash Royale. Clash Royale turned to be a gigantic hit, and those transferred lessons were important for the new game's success. In the end, the team turns the snags of Smashland into the working knowledge of the company. Smashland wasn't unique. Supercell holds the same kind of post-mortem analysis after every major game failure. The first lesson for us here is that learning from a failed experiment or trial is not only an attitude, but a process. When a failure occurs, the team starts the process of replay, analysis, learning in an orderly fashion. Doing this keeps the team looking ahead. We all know that when a project fails, there's a temptation to start casting blame at someone or something. The existence of a learning process pushes employees to focus on more positive action. The second lesson is that the attitude of team leaders is particularly critical in the face of failure. Leaders must make it clear to employees that they are most interested in finding the root cause of the problem, pushing the team to learn and iterate, rather than simply punishing the person involved. This is especially true when you want daring employees. Why do Supercell's leaders pop open the champagne after a project failure? To convey exactly this attitude. Finally, leaders should also pay attention to the attitudes of their staff. Do their employees want to hide failure? Or are they willing to take the initiative and share experiences and identify lessons learned? It's attitudes like this, in both leaders and in the rest of the company, that decide whether your organization can learn from failure and continue to innovate. Here's your challenge question for this lesson. Think of a recent failed experiment at your company. Where do you think your company stands on the spectrum of tolerance for failure? Does that match your company's creative strategy? Or should the company's level of tolerance be different? Why?